So what we're going to touch on today is just the basics of fire risk assessments, what you should know, what you should be looking for when we're, basically prior to our fire risk assessment, for our fire risk assessor coming out to visit us. What should we look at? What should we be thinking about regarding choosing the fire risk assessor? What we should be preparing for their assessment, what documents are needed, and what we should be doing basically in the area of fire safety. Okay, so if I may, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Alternatively, if you'd like to put them in the chat, if you'd like to discuss them further at a later point, feel free to send me an email, andrew@safetyforward.co.uk, or you can email info@safetyforward, or any of our office staff, really. Okay, so
Sorry, Andy, you've muted yourself.
Sorry, yeah, my apologies for that. I don't know how that happened then. Right, wonderful. There we go. Right, so what is a fire risk assessment? Is a structured, systematic evaluation of a building, its activities and its occupants to identify potential fire hazards and to determine the likelihood of a fire and the implementation of measures to minimise the risk. So what are we doing with the fire risk assessment is to look at the building itself, the processes that are undertaken within the organisation that may present a fire risk, and the actual building, the layout and the building, how it's been built. Has it been built to regulations? Is the suitable compartmentalisation in place? Things like this. We want to just we use the fire risk assessment to make sure that building is safe for whatever activities are being undertaken within there. So who can conduct a fire risk assessment? So the laws on this have recently changed. As many of you have probably seen Grenfell. That has really changed the game for fire risk assessments, and there's been many updates to the regulatory reform order, which is the main Fire Safety Act. So a fire risk assessment must be carried out by a competent person, and competencies are not just straight to qualifications or experience. It's a combination. So competencies varies, with many opting to just use if you use the fire risk assessors register provided by the Institute of Fire Safety Matters, IFSM. They have a fire risk assessor register that can help you to select the correct competency of fire risk assessor required. However, in the UK, competency of a fire risk assessor is defined by their ability to apply a combination of skills, knowledge, experience and behaviours, SCEB for short, to identify and manage fire risks effectively. So recently, with the latest update in legislation, there is actually now guidance on levels of competency for fire risk assessors, and they come in 3 different tiers. So it's definitely worth having a look into those before you get your fire risk assessor out, to ensure that you are taking somebody who is competent to do so. So when dealing with, when choosing a fire risk assessor, or if you're trying to train internally, if you're looking to become your fire risk assessor for the building, if you're looking to train internally, there are multiple ways we can go about it. So the starting point can be level 2 certificate in principles of fire risk assessment. This is a very good starting point for understanding the basic principles. However, it would not deem you competent to conduct a fire risk assessment. Just be aware the qualifications alone do not deem anybody competent to just do the fire risk assessment. However, you would very much prefer to have someone with the qualifications over somebody without. At least you have some form of evidence of competency. So you can do the NEBOSH certificate in fire safety, which is quite a comprehensive course. You can do it remote learning, or you can do it in a classroom environment over, I believe it's a 1 or 2 week period. And that is probably one of the most recognised qualifications in fire safety, and it comes with the NEBOSH certificate in fire safety, which is obviously globally recognised. Then the final one for your courses that you could do is actually, this was where I was trained, is the 5-day fire risk assessor course. I went to the Fire Service College in Moreton-on-the-Marsh. You stay there for a week. It's all you basically just live there for the week, and you eat, sleep and breathe fire risk assessments while you're there. It's quite eye-opening, that course is. And when you take the fire risk assessor course, I found I was on there with a lot of people with practical experience. There's a lot of the people in there were ex-services, they're ex-police, fire service, special forces, all sorts were on there. So you got a really good range of people's competencies and understanding of fire, which was great. You know, it really helped with the learning. I found the 5-day fire risk assessor course very good, very informative, and the gentleman who actually delivered the course was extremely knowledgeable in the fire risk. So yeah, I did the 5-day course, but to be honest, if you're going to be looking at doing fire risk assessments, it's really the top two that you want, one of the top two. So you want really your NEBOSH certificate in fire safety or your 5-day fire risk assessor course. There are other places that do deliver the 5-day fire risk assessor course. It's just obviously I did the fire service college one. That's the one I'm aware of. So when do I need a fire risk assessment? So a fire risk assessment is a legal requirement for all non-domestic premises, including workplaces, commercial buildings, and the common parts of multi-occupancy residential buildings, block of flats, housing multiple occupancy. So any business premises, any workplace, office, shop, or commercial premises requires a fire risk assessment. All residential buildings require a fire risk assessment. So common areas of flats, masonettes, housing multiple occupancies, public premises such as schools, hospitals, entertainment venues, and community centres. Vacant premises, even an empty building, still needs a fire risk assessment because it may affect other buildings, it may affect anything surrounding it with the outbreak of a fire. And agricultural land, warehouses, and transport premises all need fire risk assessments. All would require different levels of fire risk assessor competencies. So, for example, if you're looking at a residential building with a housing multiple occupancy, if it's a multi-floor building or a block of flats, you would want an extremely highly competent fire risk assessor for that. Otherwise, as everybody's probably seen, is we can end up in a bit of trouble. If anybody's seen Grenfell, that's literally holding up a mirror to fire risk assessors. This is what could happen to you if you are not competent to do this, and it's not pleasant. So obviously, you know, your lower form of competency of a fire risk assessor would be what you'd want to come into a small office, you know, small venues, very small shops, things like that would all be under a low level competency fire risk assessor. And then obviously as you get to some smaller warehouses, smaller office buildings, some other office buildings and such, they would require a medium competency fire risk assessor. And then when you're looking at large entertainment venues, schools, hospitals, you would want and housing multiple occupancy blocks of flats, you would want a top tier competency of a fire risk assessor just to cover your back. You know, it really is worth it. If anybody isn't familiar with Grenfell, please if you're responsible for fire risk assessments, please familiarise yourselves with them, with the Grenfell case, because it is quite eye-opening as to what can happen, what we don't expect to happen, but what can happen as a fire risk assessor. Okay, so what should I prepare for my fire risk assessment documentation wise? So what we want to be doing, realistically, we want to be having the fire extinguisher service certificate available. A lot of people display it should be recorded in the fire logbook, but you will have it. You should, if you've had it done, a certificate will have been provided for that. Your fire risk assessor will need a copy of that for evidence. Okay, as well as the fire alarm service certificate, which is on a 6-monthly basis by a competent fire safety technician or an electrician. Okay, regards to that, that'll be 6-monthly, should be recorded in the fire logbook as well, should also provide you with a certificate. We will also need our own testing of the emergency lighting record, of the fire alarm record available. So once again, fire logbooks are wonderful for recording all of this information, because you can get the vast majority of it all into a fire logbook. Especially, just be careful when buying fire logbooks, because some of them, they do exclusively fire alarm testing. Some of them do emergency lighting testing. I turned up at one of my clients once and they'd cleared off an action from their audit of having a fire logbook introduced to the organisation. However, rather than finding one and bringing that in, they actually didn't realise, and it's my fault for not explaining it thoroughly enough, is that one book can do all of it. My client had 5 different books, So they brought an emergency lighting one, a fire alarm one, fire extinguisher, practice evacuations, and we end up with books everywhere, and it's just completely unnecessary. So with the logbook, we want to have our internal testing of the fire alarm, which should be done on a weekly basis, must be recorded legally. So your emergency lighting service certificate, which is on an annual basis, would be done by an external competent electrician or fire safety technician, recommended to be done by those. I have some people that try to do it themselves internally. Are they competent to do so? I would say no. You know, I don't believe that maybe, yes, you can test the emergency lighting. Maybe you can do the 3-hour discharge test on it. However, you are not competent to identify electrical faults, and you are not competent to rectify these faults. So it's better to just use a competent person in that one. Competency is massive in fire risk assessments and anything around fire risk assessments, around the servicing. So we really have such a heavy focus on competency. Okay. So fire alarm service 6 monthly, internal testing weekly, emergency lighting service annually, also known as a discharge test, internal testing monthly. Suppression systems or sprinkler systems, the frequency of inspection or of service on those will depend on the system themselves. Quite often you'll find it in the manufacturer's instructions. We typically follow those as gospel in regards to servicing equipment like this. They should also be recorded in the fire logbook as well. Practice evacuations. So these are required as a legal requirement, should be done 6 monthly. However, they should be performed more frequently if you have any significant changes to your organisation, you change the layout, anything like this. We should be looking at redoing a practice evacuation, as differences in routes, changes in layouts can all affect our evacuation, and we need to know before the time that is an actual evacuation, we need to know that it works. So practice evacuations must be recorded in the fire logbook. As much information as you can. That's all I'll say on practice evacuations. As much information on that evacuation as you can in that logbook. What went wrong? How long did it take you to get your roll call done? How long did it take you to get people to a place of safety? A place of safety being outside of the building where they're no longer affected by the fire. You know, depending on the building size, it varies on the time scale that you want to get your practice evacuations done in. But as a rule of thumb, 2.5 minutes is the longest it should really be. You know, you want to be out much quicker than that, and I hope you would be in these situations. So we also need our EICR certificate, which is the fixed wiring inspection. This is often done on a 3 to 5 yearly basis. That's in buildings. If we're assessing porter cabins with fixed appliances, this should be done annually. So just be aware of that if we won't have to do pat testing if we've got a porter cabin and everything's hardwired. However, you will have to do your fixed wiring inspection, and all of the equipment inside will be covered under that on an annual basis. Pat testing. So we need your pat testing certificate. This is typically done on an annual basis. Some places do it more frequently. Some places, like very, very, very low risk offices, typically can do it on a 1 or 2 yearly basis. Whilst it's not a legal requirement, quite often when you have your pat testing done, they will cover all of your equipment for an inspection as well, which then covers you in line with PUA, which is provision and use of work equipment regulations. It's a nice way to just tick that box off and make sure that all of your equipment has been inspected and make sure that we are compliant. So, air conditioning service certificate. When people think of things that can spread fire around a building, air conditioning very rarely comes up. So air conditioning could spread fire around your whole building. You know, it's got a gas supply which is flammable, and it literally is piped around your whole building. So with your air conditioning, it's very important to make sure it's serviced annually. We have our certificate available. And also, if you look at quite often when I go to do a fire risk assessment, I will look around the actual outlet area of the air conditioner, especially if it's in the ceiling, for dust and build-up of dirt around the outside of it. If we have that, it should be cleaned, as it can blow hazardous things into the environment, hazardous dusts and other chemicals. Okay, so electric vehicle charger service certificates. So these are not just for cars. This can be for a forklift truck charger, a pallet stacker, any other kind of equipment like that requires a charger. You've got low-level order pickers, which are like ride-on pallet trucks, things like that. whilst all of your equipment requires the service, your chargers need one too. So just be aware, EV chargers should be serviced annually for electric vehicles. Forklift truck chargers would typically be serviced as part of their contract when they're servicing the forklift truck. However, it might not be, so just double check on that and make sure that your pallet stacker, which is very similar to a forklift truck charging station, is also subject to annual service. We'll need a document to prove this as well if possible. So then we move on to mains gas appliances, the gas boiler, Powermatic heaters, which you tend to find in workshops. Powermatic is actually spelt like that as well, so it's not a mistake. There is just no E in there. And they must be serviced by a gas safe registered engineer on an annual basis. They will provide you with a certificate, and you should keep that on record for your fire risk assessment. And finally, from this list is the internal inspection document. So you should be doing a weekly, daily, weekly, or possibly monthly, depending on your the level of risk within your organisation. But we should be doing an inspection, and it should be recorded. Escape routes, signage, fire doors, fire exits, and firefighting equipment. We should be doing these because obviously throughout the week, people will quite often move. They will move fire extinguishers to hold open fire doors quite often, and things will be moved, or escape routes might be blocked by equipment and nobody knows because nobody's had to use the route. So we should be doing inspections on all of those. That should be recorded as well. So further documentation just required for the fire risk assessment would be your working floor plans or building drawings or an evacuation plan, a fire policy if you have one, a fire procedure is needed, any fire marshal certificates that you have, a zone plan if you've had one drawn up for your fire marshals to ensure they can sweep the building suitably and safely and stay out of any areas not required to enter where there won't be any people working. Your fire risk assessor will probably ask you for a contingency plan, a plan for you to recommence working after the event of a fire as swiftly as possible. So if you have one of those in place, please make it available for your fire risk assessor. And your induction process or document. So this will be just to highlight that we are covering fire safety on the induction. We are showing people all of the emergency exits, all the firefighting precisions, the policy or procedure in place for fire. All these kind of things should be included in your walk around of your induction process and should be signed off by employees as completed. So just a few quick considerations here to go through with you, if that's okay, when you're looking at your fire alarm, for example. So with your fire alarm, always think, can my fire alarm be heard throughout the premises when initiated from a single point? There's been a lot of times where I've had people using air horns, using other things like that, and they'll stand at the end of a yard, blow the air horn, and nobody can hear it, or maybe just the people in the close proximity can hear it. So this is where we need to consider a proper alarm system. We can use what's known as a manual evacuator. I'm not sure how recently, but now you can actually interlink up to, I believe it's 40 manual evacuators. So if you can't afford to put in a proper fire alarm, these are the next best thing. They still have to be tested weekly. So just be aware of that the manual evacuators, whilst they're not a hardwired electronic fire alarm, they are Bluetooth or Wi-Fi connected, and you can connect them around your premises, as many as you want, up to about 40, and they will set off the alarm around the premises. They're also fitted with flashing beacons, which is a massive help in loud environments. So where you have a hardwired alarm, all alarms, must be tested weekly, but when you have a hardwired, it must be serviced on a 6-monthly basis by a competent fire safety technician or electrician. You must make sure that all of your call points, any of your red buttons, must be clearly visible and unobstructed. And also remember that air horns are a suitable temporary measure. They are not a permanent solution for your fire alarm. They are there just to tide us over until we can fit a proper fire alarm. They will never be considered a suitable fire alarm permanently. So when you're thinking about automatic fire detection, so heat and smoke detectors, are all high risk areas fitted with it? Consider your server rooms. Have they got suitable smoke detectors? Your kitchen area, does it have a heat detector? You don't want smoke because it'll be going off every 2 minutes. Cosh storage areas, office spaces with electrical equipment, all of these things. Is your detection in good condition and unobstructed? Just yesterday, I went out somewhere and I pulled tape off a detector. because somebody, when they were doing some building works, they've literally taped around the detector to stop setting the alarm system off. Electrician's finished his work, done his job, off he's gone, not bothered uncovering it. So if there was a fire in that area, then the lady sitting in the office next door would not have had any idea. Nobody knew. So always inspect your detectors and make sure they're in good condition, they're unobstructed. Make sure they're tested weekly with your fire alarm. And you can also check and make sure they're all working by just checking the alarm panel. However, the alarm panel will not indicate whether the detector is taped off or anything like that. It will just highlight any faults with the electrics behind it. Emergency lighting. So quite a straightforward one. Is emergency lighting in place on all escape routes internally and externally? It is a legal requirement to have emergency lighting on all escape routes. So just bear that in mind. If you think, is it a legal requirement to have it here? Yes, it is. Is the emergency lighting subject to monthly internal testing and annual service by a competent person? People do try to do it themselves. Do not advise it. We'll never ever sign it off as okay if you do. I really believe stuff like this should be left to electricians and fire safety technicians who are competent to do so. And is all emergency lighting in full working order and unobstructed by goods and stock? Quite often when I go on mezzanine areas, people will have their emergency lighting in place. However, they've got good stock stacked up on there for storage and you can't see it. So you need to consider these things where you're putting your stock. Am I blocking emergency lighting? Can people still see an escape route? Because quite often when you're on a mezzanine, if you don't have the appropriate signage in place, as you should, your exits can become invisible if you don't know the layout to it. And with the mezzanine, a lot of combustible materials, quite a lot of packaging are usually stored on there. Quite often they can be constructed from wood. Obviously we want the metal frame and we want fire resistant materials. However, if you've bought a building or you've moved into a building and you're not sure, it could be a serious risk. So, we always need to make sure that we think about where we're storing goods. So, considerations for escape routes. Are all escape routes easily identifiable with pictorial and directional signage? Are there floor markings in place outlining safe working routes? Are all escape routes clear and unobstructed? All changes of level on escape routes easily visible? Paint them. If you can't see them, if there's two of the same colour floorings, but there's a change of level, paint the edge of the step, tape the edge of the step. But the only issue you're going to have with tape is that tape comes away eventually and creates trip hazards. So we'd always recommend painting them if possible. And are any steps or stairs on escape routes in good condition? Quite often you'll step out of an emergency exit onto a step and it moves. This is really not okay. That's a trip hazard that's created and you could end up hurting yourself on there. Firefighting equipment. So is firefighting equipment appropriate for the hazards in the area? For example, a CO2 extinguisher in an electric forklift truck charging area or nearby a server room. Are all fire extinguishers signed, mounted and accessible? So are they signed with the appropriate signage? It has to be photoluminescent so that in the event of a fire, we know we're grabbing the correct extinguisher. Mounted on the wall at a reasonable height so they can be accessed by people and, if required, wheelchair users as well must be considered. And accessible means they must just be unobstructed with goods. Are all extinguishers in their designated location, not being used to prop open doors? Are extinguishers suitably placed on escape routes and not anywhere near nothing that they'd be used for? And are the fire extinguishers and fire blankets serviced on an annual basis? Last but not least, practice evacuations. Are they conducted twice yearly at a minimum and recorded in the fire logbook? A note from the evacuation review to discuss any shortcomings with the evacuation. Quite often people will write all these notes in the book and that's it, no more. But that way you're not actually using the practice evacuation to develop and grow. You're just using it to tick a box basically and say, yeah, we've done it. But you want to make sure that all these people are getting out of your building safely. And the only way you can actually do that is with a practice evacuation. So please review the findings for your practice evacuation. If something went wrong, find out why. What can we do to stop it in future? So are all people within the organisation considered in the evacuation plan? If people are hard of hearing, have we got visual indicators? If people are short sight, have got poor visibility or poor sight, can we have a buddy system in place? We need to make sure wheelchair users, everybody, all have to be considered in the evacuation plan. And has a point been designated as the assembly point / muster point, and is it signposted where possible? If you remember these things, they should help you sail through your fire risk assessment quite comfortably with only more specialist and bespoke issues being pulled up. So please feel free, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat. other than that, that is, oh, sorry. Wonderful. Yeah. So yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. If you would like to ask any any slightly more in-depth questions, please feel free to just drop me an email, andrew@safetyforward.co.uk, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can on those. So thank you very much.
No, you're Andy. We haven't got any questions come in so far. While you're on though, can I just clarify? When must a fire risk assessment be reviewed?
Okay. Sorry, I should have put that in. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So the fire risk assessment must be reviewed annually at a minimum by a competent person. We say at a minimum because we need to factor in for any significant changes to the industry, to your organisation, any significant changes to the activities undertaken on site, to the goods stored on site, to the layout of site. All these things factor in as a significant change. So annually is your baseline. However, more frequently, if any significant changes occur within the organisation.
That's great, Andy. Yeah, we haven't got any more questions come in at the moment.
Wonderful. Okay, then. Well, thank you all very much for attending today.